Hello everyone, I'm Sheetal Rawat. Today I'm going to discuss a very famous novel, Pride and Prejudice. It was written in 1813 and it's a romantic novel written by Jane Austen. The main characters of this novel are the Bennet family. In Bennet family there is Mr. and Mrs. Bennet and their five daughters. Mr. Bennet, a middle-aged gentleman with modest income, but his property is entailed to and can be passed only to a male heir. And he was literally tolerating his wife all the time because of her poor nature. And his wife, Mrs. Bennet, the main, or we can say the only ambition of her life is to marry her daughters off to wealthy men, no matter whether such matches give any happiness to her daughters or not. It doesn't. She's least bothered about it. And then we have the eldest daughter, Bennet daughter, Jane, and she is also the most beautiful of all sisters. And then we have Elizabeth, who is the second eldest daughter of Bennet family, and she is also the dynamic protagonist of our novel. She is attractive, witty, and intelligent. And then we have Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. Mr. Darcy, a very wealthy man, handsome, tall, intelligent, but lacks in social manners, so seems to be proud. He is Charles Bingley's friend, and this is Mr. Charles Bingley. He is a handsome, wealthy gentleman with pleasing manners, easily influenced by others, and he relies on his friend Mr. Darcy for his advice. And then we have other characters like George Wickham, an officer in militia and superficially charming. Mr. Collins, Mr. William Collins. He is Mr. Bennet's distant second cousin, a clergyman, a dull-witted, proud man, and also the heir of Mr. Bennet's property once he dies. And then we have Lady Catherine de Bourgh, wealthy woman, but she is overbearing aunt of Mr. Darcy. She is also the patroness of Mr. Collins, and she resides in Rosings Park with her sickly daughter Annie. And she plans to marry her daughter with Mr. Darcy. And then we have Mr. and Mrs. Gardner. Mr. Gardner is Mrs. Bennet's brother, a successful tradesman and a sensible character. And Aunt Gardner is also an elegant lady, and she is close to her nieces Jane and Elizabeth. And then we have Georgiana Darcy. She is Mr. Darcy's quite shy and a younger sister. And then we have our next character, Charlotte Lucas, Elizabeth's friend. She is 27 years old, and that time 27 years was considered much beyond the marriageable age. Colonel Fitzwilliam. He is the nephew of Lady Catherine and Darcy's cousin. And now the novel begins with Mrs. Bennet's attempt to persuade Mr. Bennet to visit Mr. Bingley, a rich bachelor who recently arrived in the neighborhood. Finally, Mr. Bennet agreed and visited Mr. Bingley's rented residence. This resulted that the entire Bennet family was invited to a ball, and even the entire neighborhood was also going to attend this ball. And at ball, the whole Netherfield party was present. Mr. Bingley, his two sisters, the husband of one married sister, and Bingley's best friend, Mr. Darcy. Mr. Bingley's friendly and cheerful manner makes him popular among the guests, and he gets attracted to Jane, the Bennet's eldest daughter, with whom he dances twice. On the other hand, Mr. Darcy, twice as rich as Bingley, but because of his arrogant and distant nature, he seemed to be very proud. He declines to dance with Elizabeth, saying she is not attractive enough to tempt me. Elizabeth gets hurt with this very first remark of a stranger, of Mr. Darcy, but she jokes about it with her friends. Mr. Bingley's sisters, after this ball party, Caroline and Luza, they invite Jane to Netherfield, but on the way, Jane she caught in a rain shower and she develops a bad cold. So she has to stay in Netherfield, but it makes Mrs. Bennet very happy. But Elizabeth was asked to go, and like she goes to Netherfield and she wants to meet her sick sister, and Darcy finds him attracted, like he was gradually he was getting attracted towards Elizabeth. Even he states that she has fine eyes. It makes Mrs. Bingley jealous of Elizabeth, as she liked Mr. Darcy. Well, Elizabeth, she was unaware of Darcy's developing interest in her, and now Elizabeth and Jane, they return home, and there they find Mr. Collins, Mr. Bennet's cousin and the heir of Longbourn estate. He visits their home and is a stupid, proud clergyman who came to marry one of the Bennet sisters. Initially, he is attracted towards Jane, as she was the most beautiful and eldest Bennet sister. But when he learned that she is already engaged, then he shifted his attention on Elizabeth. Then we see that Elizabeth and her family, they meet a dashing, charming army officer, George Wickham. George Wickham tells Elizabeth about his connection with Darcy family and how Darcy deprived him of a living, of a permanent position as a clergyman with good revenue, which Darcy's late father promised him. It makes Elizabeth dislike Mr. Darcy even more. At the ball at Netherfield, Mr. Darcy asks Elizabeth to dance, and despite of Elizabeth's vow never to dance with him, she accepts. But Elizabeth and Jane, excluding Elizabeth and Jane, their mother and younger sisters, they display lack of decorum, and Mrs. Bennet even hints loudly in front of everyone that she fully expects Jane and Bingley to become engaged. And in the next scene, we see that Mr. Collins, he is proposing Elizabeth in his usual stupid ways, which Elizabeth declines firmly, and that makes Elizabeth's father very happy, but mother furious. And now, shortly after that, we see that Bingley suddenly departs for London without any plans to return. And Collins, after Elizabeth's rejection, he proposes her friend Charlotte Lucas. And Elizabeth was surprised at her friend's decision. But Charlotte, she says that at the age of 27, she is grateful to this proposal, as it guarantees her a comfortable home and secures her future. So she marries him, and they leave for Kent. And now, after Bingley's departure to London, the heartbroken Jane, she also visits London to her uncle and aunt Gardiner, and in hope to meet Mr. Bingley there. But it seems Mr. Bingley has no intention to meet her. In the spring, Elizabeth visits Charlotte and Mr. Collins in Kent, and there Elizabeth and her host, they were invited by Lady Catherine at Rosings Park. Mr. Collins is also the patroness of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and now we have already discussed that she is also Mr. Darcy's aunt, and she also wants her sickly daughter to marry with Mr. Darcy. And now Lady Catherine, she is very proud in nature, and this is Annie. She is sickly daughter of Lady Catherine, and as Lady Catherine, she is very proud lady. She tries to insult Elizabeth of her middle class and of her education, but very bravely Elizabeth counters her back. And then Elizabeth was asked to play piano. Initially, Elizabeth refuses, but then she starts playing, and it attracts Colonel Fitzwilliam. Elizabeth also seems she was impressed by his gentleman-like manners, and soon Darcy also joins them at the piano as he wanted to listen to her. But Elizabeth tells him he may not frighten her as he came straight towards her. And she also tells Fitzwilliam about the ball where Darcy did not dance because no reason, without any reason. There were ladies sitting in want of a partner, but still, Mr. Darcy didn't dance with any of the lady. And then Mr. Darcy, he tries to tell her that he cannot easily converse with strangers, but Elizabeth, she was not able to understand him, and she could not figure out that Mr. Darcy had some feelings towards her. And then one day, Mr. Fitzwilliam, he tells Elizabeth that how Darcy saved his friend Bingley from an undesirable match. Elizabeth realizes it was Mr. Darcy who prevented Jane and Bingley's engagement. Later, Mr. Darcy proposes Elizabeth, declaring his love towards her despite of her low social connections. Elizabeth rejects him angrily, stating she could never have a man who could cause her sister such unhappiness, as he prevented Mr. Bingley to marry Jane, and also accuses Mr. Darcy of treating Wickham unjustly. Mr. Darcy says yes, he saved Bingley from this marriage because it was a low connection marriage, and he feels that it was right because he thought that he was not able to explain, but he said that yes, I thought that it was right what I did, but yes, he dismisses his accusation regarding Wickham. But after hearing this, Elizabeth states firmly that he is the last person she could ever marry him. And then later we see that Elizabeth, she was in a very sad state, and Mr. Darcy comes and he delivers a letter to Elizabeth, and then he explains that in the letter that the son, the Wickham, he was the son of his father Stuart, and he had Mr. Wickham himself had refused living his father had arranged for him, and instead asked for money, and soon he spent all the money and asked for living again, which he was refused. And then Wickham tried to elope with Georgiana, Darcy's 15-year-old sister, for her dowry. And Mr. Darcy also writes that he separated Jane and Bingley because of Jane's reserved behavior. He thought Jane had no feeling for Bingley, and also because of the lack of social behavior represented by her family members. Elizabeth is ashamed of her family's behavior and also on her own prejudice against Mr. Darcy. Some months later, Elizabeth visits Gardiner, his uncle and aunt's home, and then she accompanies his uncle and the Gardiners, her uncle and aunt, on a tour to Derbyshire. There they visit Pemberley Hills, the Darcy estate. They thought that maybe Darcy was not at Pemberley Hills at that time, and there the servants gave a very good they said very good things about Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth was also very much astonished and admired the royal beauty of the Pemberley estate. But to their surprise, she encountered Mr. Darcy, and she was a little comfortable, but Mr. Darcy seemed to be very friendly, and he invites Gardiner for and Elizabeth to meet his sister, and Elizabeth and her sister connects very well, and Darcy seemed to be very happy at this. And later Mr. Gardiner went for fishing, and now Elizabeth receives the news that her sister Lydia had run off with Wickham. She tells the whole incident to Mr. Darcy, and immediately she starts she departs in haste, and she thought that Lydia has ruined her family's good name, and now she will never have a chance to see Mr. Darcy again. Now Elizabeth reaches her home and got the news that Wickham was not ready to marry Lydia, but then, with the settlement of a big amount, he agreed to marry Lydia. Lydia visits the family and tells Elizabeth that Mr. Darcy was also present in her marriage with her uncle, Mr. Gardner. Though Mr. Darcy wanted to keep it as a secret, but still, Mrs. Gardner, she feels that she must tell the truth and she must inform Elizabeth. So she says that Mr. Darcy, he is the person who secured the match at a great expense. And then Elizabeth realized that it was because of Mr. Darcy that her family is saved from this bad name. And later we see that Mr. Bingley also comes with Mr. Darcy. They come to the Netherfield, and this time Bingley proposes Jane, and Jane happily accepts it. And Elizabeth again realized it was due to Mr. Darcy's efforts that her sister and her family got this happy moment. And when Lady Catherine, she heard rumors that Darcy intends to marry Elizabeth. She is very she was very insulting way. In a very insulting way, she demands Elizabeth never to accept Mr. Darcy's proposal. Elizabeth refuses Lady Catherine's proposal, or we can say her order. And at this, Lady Catherine leaves in anger, leaving insulting comments about her family. And then Mr. Darcy, heartened, he was encouraged by Elizabeth's reply to his aunt. He again proposes Elizabeth, and at this time his proposal was accepted. And Elizabeth, her father, he could not believe that Elizabeth could accept Mr. Darcy's proposal, and he could accept Mr. Darcy as her husband. But when she told him about what Mr. Darcy did for their family, and because of his true love, now she wants to marry Mr. Darcy for love, not for position and wealth, but for love. And at last, Elizabeth's father, he was convinced, and then at the end we see that Elizabeth, she marries Mr. Darcy. And with this happy ending, the novel ends. This is one of my favorite novels, and I would advise you to must watch Pride and Prejudice movies as well. There are many movies made on this novel, and I'm sure you would love watching all these movies. Thank you so much. Thank you.